Assalamu alaikum. Before we start this lecture, I want you to spend some time looking at the following picture. Try to tell me what you can observe in the picture. Let's spend more time and focus deep inside. You can pause the video and think about it. Okay, what can you see? Some of you might think it's galaxy. Some of you might think it's an explosion of something. Some of you might think it is an art gallery. It's an art work. But what if I tell you what you observe is something that we usually ignore and we don't sometimes pay any attention? What you can see at this side is basically compromise of pores, of minerals and bacteria. And if you zoom even more inside, you would see a marvelous things, a heaven of wonder. Lots of microorganisms live in this tiny space. This is basically the soil, which we usually ignore. And it is true, as Leonardo da Vinci said, we know more about the movement of the celestial bodies than about the soil underneath. From now onward, I want you to change your perception and perspective about soil because it compromises the whole of our life. The soil around us. It is true that we cannot escape from the soil. Even if you close the door in a very clean room, then you might find soil in every piece around you. Soil is in the building, it is in the air, it is actually the source of food that you are eating, and it touches the water that you are drinking. It's eventually everywhere around us. But why do we have really to care about soil? Why it is important to study soil? This is simply because soil is a very important natural resource, and it's basically the heart of everything. And understanding this system is a very important thing to understand the sustainability of our life and the ecosystem around us. Soil is actually the foundation of society. Literally, if we talk about any society that existed on Earth ever since, then soil is the main reason behind their existence. From the soil, our civilizations has built their buildings. They flourished their agricultural activities, and they found the water resources. Let's look back at our history in Oman. How the forts and the castles were built, where the first settlement of people existed. It's all around a fertile soil and a source of water, as you can see in these pictures. And if we look at other societies that exist on Earth, like the Pharaoh society, Hadarat al-Fara'ina, like any societies like Sumer, like any of them, you will see that the soil and water were part of their existence. And you can also look back at the history. Why some of the civilizations fall and collapse? ليش اختفت بعض civilizations? And you will find because they mismanaged their soil and water resources. Soil is the source of nearly all the food that we eat. Without soil and without a fertile soil and without water, life cannot flourish. Soil also in the process of many environmental aspects, as it can also act as actually something that actually prevent the pollution in the soil. And the degradation of this natural resource, when we mismanage this natural resources, And by our activities, we will lose it. It will degrade. And the degradation is irreversible. It means that once we destroy this natural resource, it becomes very difficult to bring it back to its natural status. That's why we have to understand the system, and that's why we have to care about it. If we look at the soil from different scales, from a tiny microscopic scale to a very large scale like a continent, we would find that soil is at the heart of all different spheres that we came to know. The atmosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere. The atmosphere, which actually describes the gases, the biosphere, which describes the biological life, including plants, animal, microbes, the lithosphere, which includes the rocks, the minerals, and the sediments, and the hydrosphere, which describe the water cycle. All of these famous spheres, soil is in between them. At one point or another, those spheres interact through the soil. Now let me give you an example. Let's look at this interaction from a very small scale, or let's start it from a larger scale. Let's put it at this. If we look at it, we would find that the soil is basically where actually lots of gases escapes, like let's say from the rocks to the air. And the soil is basically where plant and animal exist, and the soil where water passes between the atmosphere and the groundwater. So at a large scale, like kilometer scale, soil is there. Now let's zoom in and look at a meter scale. If we dig a pit and look at this pit, get a soil profile, which is basically a soil with its layers, you would find that soil is at the interface between the biosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere, I mean the groundwater resources. If rain happened to fall, then it will pass through the soil to the groundwater, so soil in the middle. The soil also, you have the roots of the plants, you have a lot of biological life living there, so soil is there. It's actually like a burger, where you have the burger in the middle of the bread. Let's look now at it deeper. If we look at the deeper, the soil comprised of particles like sand and other particles. These are minerals, but between them, there are some spaces, and these spaces can be filled with air or water. Inside these spaces, lots of life live in, as I showed you in the first slide. Lots of biological life live there, water is there, air is there. And if you even zoom to a very tiny scale, you would find that the soil has even charges. And due to these charges, the soil is able to absorb and retain water and nutrient that can later on support life. So soil everywhere. And that's why lots of people try to understand what is soil for them, try to describe it. Here, I'm giving you an example of different views by actors, politicians, environmentalists, and each of them view the soil from their perspective, from their window. One of them, called Jacob Bronowski, he describes soil as, you will die, but the carbon will not. Its career does not end with you. It will return to the soil, and there a plant may take it up again in a time, send it once more on a cycle of plant and animal life. What does it mean to him? It means that when we die, we still compromise, or we still consist of carbon, which would stay eternal forever. This carbon will return back to the soil, and then it might be taken by animal or plant, and therefore it enters the life cycle again. And when these plants or animals die, it will again keep going between the atmosphere, the biological life, and the soil. So this is for him, soil is life. Let's look at what Ricardo Montalban had said. He's a Mexican actor. He describes soil as standing on soil feels so much different than standing on city pavement. It lets you look inward and reflect. It allows you, your inner life, to grow. For him, soil is even emotional. It has a feeling that when you take out your shoes and stand on a soil, it feels completely different than when you walk on a pavement. I guess you have experienced it. Another guy, Franklin Roosevelt, is actually one of the presidents of the United States, describes soil, like air, like water, is a natural resource that we must protect in order to have future on planet Earth. So soil is everything, and soil is even determine the future of the next generation. This is basically by Terry Cooper, soil. For Franklin Roosevelt, the president, one of the presidents of the United States, he described soil as the nations that destroy its soil destroys itself. And this is really true. Anyone that destroy the soil, degrade the resources, then it is irreversible. It will become very difficult to bring it back to its natural resources. And therefore, the society collapsed. And this is evidence from many, many old societies who now we don't see on Earth. All natural resources are soil or derivatives of soil. Farmers, ranges, crops, and livestock, forest, irrigation water, and even water power resolve themselves into questions of soil. Soil is therefore the basic natural resources. This is what Aldo Leopold believed. Now, what is soil for you? Think and have a good meditation time. After knowing a little bit about the definition of soil and some different views, we should now look at the soil and investigate of what does it comprise of. So soil consists of different things. Soil consists of the solid part and the pore spaces, which can be filled with different things. So it actually consists of the solid particles, which basically are minerals. And this is actually like counts for 48%. Then you have the pore spaces, the remaining percentage, which can be either filled with organic matter or air or water, as you can see. From this, we can now define soil. We can come to a scientific definition of a soil, which can be described as a natural dynamic body composed of, let's say, of minerals and organic solids, gases, liquids, and living organisms. And the soil is capable for supporting the plant growth that is resulted from an integrated effect of climate, living organisms acting upon parent materials as conditions by topography over a period of time. This definition describes actually different aspects, describe the soil, the nature of soil, describes the actually what the soil consisted of, and describe the formation of soil. Three different things. So it is described as a natural body, and you can simplify it. It is not necessary to memorize it, but I want you to understand the definition and to have a feeling of it. It's a natural body composed of two different things. You can put it as this, of solid materials and pore spaces. The solid material, the pore spaces can be filled either with air, water, or it can be also organic matter. And the soil is basically capable of supporting the life, whether it's animal or plants. And it is formed from different soil formation factors that I will introduce it more to you in the next lectures, but they are actually the climate, the parent material, the organisms, the topography, and the time. So this is in a simple way. Now, let us understand what the soil is capable of doing. Well, and this is what described as the functions of soil. Now, if we look at the soil, soil is basically the medium for plant growth, by which it actually provides air, water, and the nutrient for the plants. Soil also is found in the hydraulic cycle. It is actually where water can be purified or contaminated, or actually run from between the groundwater to the atmosphere. Soil also used for recycling, by which if anything died in the soil, the microorganisms in the soil would actually recycle these things and bring it back to the soil, as the story of the carbon. Soil is a habitat. It's a place where lots of organisms live, and soil can be used as an engineering medium. Now let's look at each point individually. Soil is a medium for plant growth. Soil is the place where we grow plants and where plant also can actually get a support. Now, if we look at the plant, we only see the upper part, but the lower part is actually beyond the ground, the roots. So the soil provides anchorage to the plant. It actually supports the plant from falling against the winds. That's why plants stand, because soil is the foundation for plants. Soil also is a source for the chemicals that the plant uses. It's actually where the plant can get its nutrient, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and many others. And soil basically is the place where the plant can can respire and transpire. Basically, the plants through the roots take actually the carbon dioxide, and then it generates oxygen. Other things, other functions for the soil related to the plant is that soil can moderate the temperature. Now, if you put a thermometer in the air and you put another thermometer in the soil, you would find a difference in the temperature. The temperature in the air might be, let's say, 30 degrees, while in the soil, it might be 20. Why is that? Because soil acts as an insulator for the temperature. It actually reduces the temperature, and therefore the plant find the temperature moderate for them so they can grow healthily. If we look at the nutrient that the plant need, they're actually divided into micro and macronutrient. In a simple way, the macronutrient are the nutrients that the plant need in larger quantities, while the micronutrients are the nutrients that the plant need in smaller quantities. So these sources of macro and micronutrient can be found in the soil. And here you have an example of macronutrient like NPK, calcium, and magnesium, where examples of the micronutrient can be like boron, copper, zinc, manganese, and many others which are presented in the table here. If we look at another function of soil, a function that is related to water, is basically the soil and water relationship. We can find that almost all waters that, like in the river, in the streams, in the lake, all flows through the soil. Soil can purify this water. If you have a water that is a little bit contaminated, then once it passes through the pore spaces of the soil, because of the charges and because of the pore spaces, the water can be purified. So the soil can act as a filter, form the contaminant. Soil also can, or water can get contaminated by the soil. Imagine you have a wadi, and when the wadi flows on the soil, it actually erodes, it removes some of the soil particles, and therefore it becomes brown like this. So here in this condition, the soil contaminated the water physically, but also the soil with its nutrient can also contaminate the water like chemically. So the soil holds two sides of the equation here. And soil can control actually the flow of water, whether it is through the soil or over the soil surface. Soil is also very important for recycling of the material. When you throw, for example, plant materials, or you throw waste, whatever type of organic waste like food or whatever things, or even a dead bodies of animal or plant, even human, which is actually on the soil and buried on the soil. The microorganisms that exist in the soil and the biological life that exists in the soil actually try to break down these complex materials into smaller particles. So this is a change in the physical structure from large things to smaller things, and also can break down even the carbon and the nitrogen, which later on through a process called decomposition, which later on bring back carbon and nitrogen back to the soil, and then it can go through the cycle. For example, you have the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle. So once these wastes are broken down into or decomposed into smaller things, then the essential element on it, the carbon and nitrogen, can be brought back to the cycle. Soil is also a habitat for organisms, by which like lots of organisms live in the soil, including fungi or bacteria, or lots of like animals, like let's say like rats, like worms. All of them live actually in the soil, and soil provide a good habitat for them, by which it actually provides as a shelter for them, or also it also provides them with the food that they need. So soil is full of life. If you took a spoon of soil, then you can observe a lot of life on it. And you have these some examples. And also because the societies in the soil can act collaboratively, like they have symbiotic relationships. Some of them have a symbiotic relationship, علاقة منفعة, by which, for example, bacteria and fungi can have this symbiotic relationship. Or some of them might not stay in peace. They might have wars because some of them feed on others. So you have prey and predators. All of these exist in the soil. And finally, the soil can be used as an engineering medium. It is the place where we build our houses. And if you have a good soil, a stable soil, then you would have a stable building. But if the soil is unstable, like what you can see here, then the buildings might collapse. So that's why it is also very important to do soil testing, and very important to look at what type of soil you have before starting your construction. It's not only that, but some of the materials that we get, actually like the bricks, like the cement, or like even the iron, comes from the soil. They are actually made of soil. Finally, imagine that one day you would go into the street and you would have a piece of soil which look like a candy, and then you eat it. Would you do that? Would you believe that? Well, basically, it is doable. In some parts of the world, they consume directly the soil. Why? Because the soil contains some minerals and some nutrient, which can be used as a supplement for the nutrient. In some of the country, they have deficiencies, let's say, of iron, or let's say of other essential elements that the body needs. And the soil is rich of them. So some of them can consume this soil, and one day you might consume it. So that's all about this lecture. I hope that you enjoyed this class, and we'll meet you in the discussion session with some more excitements. Listen to the videos several times, write your notes, and take a deep breath with soil. Thank you.